I'm glad y'all could be here this afternoon. In case you don't know me, I'm Paul Ditto. I'm the Executive Director of the Lover's Lane Foundation. The foundation is a separate legal entity that exists for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to serve our church, our members, and its ministries. We currently have about $16 million in our foundation, and we distribute about $415,000 every year to different parts of our church to help them with whatever. And the foundation, through has more than 30 endowments. That each endowment serves a different purpose, and it's almost every purpose you can think of in the church, from special needs, children in their process in church, to scholarships for graduating seniors, people who lose their jobs and can't pay the rent or can't get their car fixed so they can get a job, to keeping the lights and the air conditioning on. We put on lecture series, we put on seminars like this. We do a lot, but I think this one is one of my very favorites, or one that's dearest to my heart, and it's because I spent the first 4 years of my career as a CPA with a Big 8 accounting firm, and when I was there at Arthur Andersen, I specialized in estate planning. So I saw a lot of people come through who didn't have estate plans. I saw people die without wills, and that carried over after I was a CPA. I practiced law for 31 years with a large international law firm, and I spent the first 10 years of that 31 years doing wills and trusts. And it was amazing how many people I've seen there and since then in my church work that die without a will, or die with a will that's not been updated. The process we're going to explain to you today, we've had dozens of our members go through the process, and without exception, every single person, because I've talked to every single one of them, has said they were so glad they did it, that it was beneficial to them. Our senior pastor, Stan, went through the process, and this is sort of highlights why it's important. He pulled out his old will and looked at it, and it turns out all the witnesses he had on his will, this is how old his will was, all the witnesses were dead. So he figured, and his children were minor children, and now he has adult children. They're all married and have kids. He's told you about Claire, Claire Bear. It was important when I came here to figure out a way that we could help our members get an estate plan that would allow them to be served and served well after their death. And so we tried a couple of different ways to do that. And the first couple of years I was here, and we had sort of mixed results. And I was belaboring that point to a couple of different companies. One of them was the Texas Methodist Foundation, and one of them was the consultant that the church here has used for the last 3 capital campaigns we did. Not the one we're doing right now. We didn't have a consultant on it, but the 3 before that, we had a company that was a consultant for us to help us do those capital campaigns. And I was talking to a couple of men there, and so they and the people at Texas Methodist Foundation all said, you need to talk to the people at Philanthrocorp. They're a company that provides estate planning services for churches and parachurches like y'all. And we've known a bunch of churches that have gone through the process of partnering with them to provide estate planning services to their members, and people seem to be really happy with them. So that's when the conversation started, and I started meeting with Philanthrocorp, and sure enough, we decided that we really liked what they were offering, and we've been doing it about 1.5 years now, and we're very pleased. All of our members that have been through the process speak highly of it. And it's a process that does really, I think, 2 main things. First, it takes the estate planning away from the lawyer who charges a lot, and provides estate planning specialists that you will work with to develop your estate plan, and that is free to you. It's free to you because the foundation is going to pay for it. Our contract calls for us to pay for every single person that goes, or couple that goes through the process. We pay Philanthrocorp $3,000. So you're getting something of benefit here, but it's because it's something that's really important to you. If you fail to do this, your family's going to pay the price. and we don't want that to happen. Now, what it does cost you is Philanthrocorp, they don't practice law, the church doesn't practice law, so we can't implement the plan for you. So you'll have to go to a lawyer, take the plan that you'll develop through us, take that plan to a lawyer to document it. So I went through the process myself, and came up with an estate plan. I used, Philanthrocorp has a group of local lawyers who will provide these services to you at a fixed, reduced price. So I used one of their lawyers, and I came out with a will and a trust, a power of attorney, a medical power of attorney, a durable power of attorney, a directive to physician, a bunch of little documents, but the main thing was a will and trust. And got those all signed and sealed and delivered, and I took my plan, which was about this thick. It was a spiral-bound notebook that they developed for me to make sure that we knew exactly what I wanted. And I took my will and trust and all those other documents, and I took them to one of my best friends who is a estate planning specialist here in Dallas. Anybody who works in this area would have heard of him and would know he's well-regarded expert in the area. I know him really well. He and I went to law school together. We were CPAs together at Arthur Anderson, and we practiced law together. And I was the only non-Jew in his wedding. So he's a good friend of mine. And I took those documents to him, and I said, Larry, if I'd come to you for my estate plan and my wills and trusts, what would all of this have cost me? What would you have charged me at your hourly rate? And he said, well, it kind of depends on how much you were willing to invest in it and how efficient you were in getting information to us and answering our questions. But he said probably between $10,000 and $20,000 is what it would have cost you. Well, I paid $1,200 by going through this process. The foundation paid $3,000 for the planning, and I used one of their lawyers to actually implement the plan, and he works at a fixed price, so I knew at the conclusion of the planning process that if I wanted to implement it with one of their lawyers, it was going to cost me $1,200. No more, no less. So you have that certain certainty that you're not going to, it's kind of like hiring a contractor, and every time something comes up, he says, well, that wasn't in the price I quoted you. So it's a fixed price. So it saves you a ton of money, and it gets a really good product in your hand. It's simple. It's not hard. It's not time consuming. It's all done by phone, so it's you don't have to dress up to go down to the lawyer's office. You don't have to bake cookies because he's going to come to you. It's all on the phone. It's very simple. It's very efficient, and it's cost effective, and it has a good end result. We here at the church will actually help you execute your documents if that's something that you need. We'll arrange to have witnesses and a notary and all that kind of stuff, and we don't charge for that, of course. So it's a great process. There's been, like I said, dozens of people that have gone through it, and without exception, every single one of them has talked about how great it was. If you saw a couple of our videos that we put out, we had some testimonials from folks that have been through the process who talked about how great it was. So what you have here today is an opportunity to basically just sign up for the process. Ron Beck's here this morning, and he's from Philanthrocorp. He's worked for him for 10 years now, but before that, he was heavily involved in institutional, philanthropy with, what was the name of the university? Western Kentucky University, which is where he got his undergraduate degree. And your seminary degree was from? And so he was born in Kentucky. He went to school in Kentucky. He worked in Kentucky, and now he's here with us today. So, and you actually live in Kentucky now, even though he's worked 10 years for Philanthrocorp, and Philanthrocorp is based in Colorado Springs. So it's amazing what we can do over long reaches of time, including through estate planning. All the estate planning specialists that work for Philanthrocorp are in Colorado Springs. And you'll be dealing with them on the phone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron. He can tell you some more. I'll get back up at the end when we get to the questions and answers. And I hope you enjoyed your lunch. And this is a great process. I hope you take full advantage of it.
Oh, you make this sound so good. I think I'm ready to sign up right now. So we're going to talk about estate planning a few minutes and kind of put a little more detail and context into what Paul just described to you a few minutes ago. It's great to be back here. I was here last year about this time. It's a great month, although we had a storm last night, as all y'all know. We're going to talk about estate planning. We're going to differentiate between estate planning and financial planning. We're going to talk about estate planning for the believer, which is within the context, or should be, from our point of view, in the context of a biblical worldview. That is, that estate planning for the believer is a spiritual decision-making process before you get around to addressing the tax and legal issues, or what we call the tools and rules of this process. So that's really what brings us here. Philanthrocorp is in Colorado Springs, as Paul mentioned. We've been in business for 22 years. We work with churches across the country, parachurch ministries, and Christian colleges and universities, some seminaries around. We have about 100 clients at any one point in time, and we have a team of folks, which I'll describe to you in a few minutes, whose basic responsibility is to help people like you walk through this whole issue of estate planning within the context of that biblical worldview that I talked about a few minutes ago. Get a plan together that meets your needs, that addresses whatever is on your heart and your mind. We'll take as long to do it as you want, or we'll go through it in a pretty quick period of time, get it to a point where it's ready to go to an attorney, and Paul's already alluded to that in a minute. It's about the fact that some of us really do think that we can take it with us, and all of us are going to face a reality someday that we can't take any of it with us. So we got a plan for what we're going to do with our stuff. So that's what we want to talk about. But for a believer, we believe that this is a spiritual decision-making process before you ever get around to those tools and rules. 2 or 3 little statements about estate planning that may resonate with you. The first one is this: say not that you know another person entirely until you've settled an estate with him or her. I'll say it one more time. Say not that you know another person entirely until you've settled an estate with him or her. And I always get the nods, because we've all, by this point in time, most of us have been through an experience like that. Warren Buffett may have had another estate planning jewel of wisdom. He said the perfect amount of money to leave your children is enough so they think they can do anything, but not so much that they don't have to do anything. Now, some of us may not be in that situation. Others of us may, where the amount of inheritance that we leave our children could be really, really important. Sometimes the poorest man or woman leaves his or her children the richest inheritance. What are some examples of that? Love of family, a good work ethic, appreciation for the simple things in life, examples of a good Christian mother or father. So what is estate planning, and how does it differ from financial planning? Well, estate designing is putting a plan together that addresses your personal affairs and your assets and the management of those affairs if you should become incapacitated, and the distribution of those assets after you have passed away, or as we might refer to it, after you have graduated. Financial planning, on the other hand, is dealing with your money and how to grow your money, how to protect your money, how to protect yourself financially using a variety of financial products like long-term care insurance. Certainly life insurance comes into play. By the way, 9% of most people's assets are in cash and cash equivalents. 91% are in fixed assets. For most of our families, those fixed assets are the equity in their home, the retirement plan assets, death benefit from life insurance, and you have a few families who own a farm or ranch, who own some stocks, who own some other commercial property somewhere. The higher you're invested in those fixed assets, those illiquid assets, the higher percentage of your estate plan, of your estate, is in fixed assets. Each one of us has to have a plan for how we're going to distribute those assets. And if you don't have a plan, the state of Texas has one for you. And if you lived in Kentucky, they've got one for you. Every state has a default plan so that in case you don't have a plan in place. Well, let me give you our state stewardship premise. Estate planning, here's our premise. Estate planning is the single largest act of stewardship that most of us as Christians will ever perform. I believe that's a true statement by definition. Estate planning is the single largest act of stewardship that most of us as Christians will ever perform. That statement suggests a question. And I ask my guys this question from time to time. Thank you. Thank you. I ask this question. I say, does God own it all? And then I put up my hand. I say, no, well, wait a minute. Before you answer the question, I'm not looking for the politically correct answer. Because every one of you guys will start shaking your head up and down so fast. Oh, yes, God owns it all. Understand there are implications as to how you answer the question. Does God own it all? If He owns it all, we are His stewards. What's a synonym for steward? Manager. We're His managers of His stuff for a season. And then that season passes. Ecclesiastes 3:1. So for the believer, it is a spiritual decision-making process. What we want to do is to help you design an estate plan that addresses family, in this order, frankly. Family, kingdom impact, your own personal legacy, and yes, we do get around to addressing the tax and legal issues, the tools and rules, and all that sort of thing. But we want to start with family. I'm not sure there's anything biblical about addressing your family issues first. The tithing teachings in the Old Testament, as I understand them, are a first fruits teaching. 10% of your first fruits of your income. Actually, back in those days, there weren't many estates that even got to be settled. The Industrial Revolution brought all of that process on. Many of our grandparents had hardly anything, unless they owned some land. But we want to help you address those. We want to talk with you and help you think through legacy. You remember I mentioned family, kingdom impact, personal legacy. What is a legacy? A legacy is something that you leave behind. I've seen 2 or 3 sets of blue, or 4 or 5 sets of blue eyes in here. That's a legacy that your parents left you from their genes. That's where you got those blue eyes. They didn't just come out of the air. You pass on your values. You pass on your religious belief system to your children. You pass on your faith experience. And we believe that an estate plan is definitely a way that you're passing on your legacy. Your estate plan makes some very strong statements to your family and to your friends, certainly your brothers and sisters within the church community. Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 9. I want to read that to you. The first sentence, or part A of that first verse, you're going to be very familiar with. The rest of it, you may have heard it at one time, but I want to mention it to you. Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 9. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. You know that part. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and your gates. A refined statement of that command is in Psalm 78:4. We will tell the next generation the glorious deeds of the Lord, about His power and His mighty wonders. Your legacy, my legacy, is our home life, it's our work, it's our spiritual life, it's the ministry, it's the values that we pass on. And our estate plan gives us an opportunity to address all of those issues as we relate to some very practical considerations. So I've given you kind of a biblical context for estate planning. Now I want to talk with you about some very practical matters that we may be able to help you if. And somewhere along the line, I'm probably going to hit on one or more issue that many of you have come to hear about today. And I also know that we're going to talk about probate, and we're going to talk about a single person here as well. Here's the first one. You have assets that would generate unnecessary income taxes at death, such as 401ks, traditional IRAs, or other tax-qualified plans. Many of us older folks never got around to converting our retirement plan assets to Roth IRAs. In other words, we didn't take the money and pay the tax on it, put it into that fund, and let it grow tax-free and let it be distributed tax-free. That's what a Roth IRA does. Most of you, some of you, have funded your tax retirement plans with pre-tax dollars. So when you start drawing them out, when you get to that age, 70 and a half, where you have to start drawing it out, you have to start paying income tax on it. When you die, that retirement plan asset goes over to your surviving spouse. That's usually when you put your successor spouse on there. So when that asset passes down to children, all those deferred income taxes are now due. Here's my example. Mom and Dad were of modest means. Dad was a draftsman at General Electric in Louisville. Mom worked in a department store after us three kids were up and out of college. They accumulated $300,000 in their retirement plan. Pretty good for those guys. When Dad died, his share went to Mom, no taxes. When Mom passed away, that asset passed down to us three children. I got a big check from the mutual fund company for $100,000. And I got a bill from Uncle Sam for $30,000. Now, some of you have received part of your inheritance through receiving those retirement plan assets from your parents, and you already know what I'm talking about. That's called income with respect to the decedent. It's the IRD tax. If you have an IRD tax problem and you have a problem with sending a big chunk of that money up to Washington, there's only one way around it, through charitable giving. So if we were going to help you find a charitable gift in your retirement plan, that'd be the first place we'd look, because it's going to get taxed otherwise. We might be able to help you if that's an issue. You have sufficient assets to live on, and you want to be sure that you do the wisest tax planning to avoid unnecessary estate taxes. Who in here knows what the federal estate tax exemption is today? Paul informed me it's $11.4 million. Is that what you were going to say? Yeah. You must be an accountant. Are you an accountant? Okay. $11.4 million. So a couple with the proper planning can shelter twice that amount, $22.8 million. Now, how many I'm not going to ask for a show of hands here. How many $11.4 million families do we have sitting here today? Not many. Now, how many $22.8 million couples do we have? Even less. But if you have an estate tax problem, there are some planning ways that you can avoid sending all that money up to Washington. That's my point. So there's the IRD tax for very few of the people, perhaps somebody in this room, perhaps maybe a couple of couples, families. You've got an estate tax issue that you need to plan on and think through. There are some tax planning strategies that you can use through estate planning and the proper use of these planning tools to help mitigate the taxes in those particular situations. We'd be happy to help walk you through those. You realize we may be able to help you if you realize You could leave a significant inheritance to your children and perhaps grandchildren, and would appreciate creative input as to how this could be done to help them rather than potentially harm them. By the way, did you know that the average inheritance in this country is spent in 18 months? I had a pastor down in Georgia tell me that it was down to 12 months now. Mom and Dad have worked their whole life to accumulate, and the kids are spending it in the flash of an eye. I had a lady, granddaughters. There's alcohol abuse, drug abuse, and I'm afraid there's physical abuse in that family. And I don't want him to get any of my money. Can you help me? That could be a real problem in a certain situation here. We can help, think through, and put plans together. We had a lady sitting back here earlier who had a special needs child. That may require a special needs trust. You may have a parent who is in a health situation and needs a trust set up. Remember, you may or may not outlive them. We don't really know exactly when these events are going to happen. We can help you think through those. You may live in a blended family. The divorce rate in the church is the same as it is out in the world today. So there's some blended families here. Now, while those children are minors, you know, everybody's going to take care of the kids. We're going to educate them, provide for their care. But by the way, if you have minor children, do you have provision in your will naming their guardians? Well, we just thought that so-and-so would, some judge somewhere is going to make that decision for you if you don't have some guidance in there. And by the way, some of you are grandparents, and you have grandchildren. And you need to be making sure that your children, who are their parents, have those issues addressed in their estate plan. Remember, 75% of the people in this country do not have a current estate plan. 50% no plan, another 25% need some adjustments. So we can help you work through those particular situations if they were to come up. You are playing a significant role in providing for the raising of your grandchildren and need to think through financial and legal considerations such as a grandchildren's trust, another way that we could help you. If I haven't covered your particular situation yet, perhaps you just need a second opinion on your estate plan. Just somebody to take a look at it. But very familiar with this planning process and help you think through some things. If everything looks great from our point of view, we'll be the first to tell you. Now, Paul has already mentioned that our services don't cost you anything. He mentioned a referral network of attorneys. We created this several years ago to move estate plan documents as quickly and as efficient as possible for our charitable clients, like the Lover's Lane Foundation, this church here. The wills package if you use one of our referral attorneys, is in the $400 to $600 range. The trust package is in the $1,100 to $1,300 range. That's what he called out a minute ago, and he said his was $1,200. These are important numbers for you to know if you need any of those particular trusts. You do have to hire your own attorney to update the documents, but we can help you organize those in such a way that this may be the last time you're going to have to do planning or do substantial planning, if you will. Now, let's talk about probate for just a second. That was a question raised a few minutes ago. Probate court, the probate process is a process whereby the state proves your will. And that's basically the terminology here. It's a legal process. Every state has probate. Some states are more onerous than others. I'm not sure how Texas rates.
It can be easy if your documents are right.
if your documents are right. Now, if you lived in California, it's onerous. If you lived in Missouri, I've done seminars out in Missouri, it's onerous in Missouri. It's onerous down in Florida. That's why they use these revocable living trusts so much. But the probate process is a process whereby your executor is going to take your documents and prove them to a judge over a series of meetings and period of time to give the court's blessing to moving all of your assets to wherever you intended them to go. With a revocable living trust, if you have enough assets that justify establishing one of those, you create this legal entity, this trust, and you put your assets in there, like say you title your house and put it into the trust. And then when you pass away, the title to that asset transfers by contract rather than through the legal process. So you don't have to go to court. It's a contractual process that your trustee would take over at that point. So a revocable living trust could be something that would be of interest to you. Now, Paul may want to expand on that discussion just a little bit. Single. You're the single lady back here. Do you have a will now? If you died going home today, the state of Texas has got a will. And you may or may not like where all that's going, but it's going to go out into generations you may not have even know you have. There could be a feeding frenzy depending on how much money you got. But anyway, it is an important thing that you need. Do you have any children? Okay, well, there you go. There's a potential charitable gift right there too. Or something. There is something. We all need to make those decisions within the context of our family situations and these spiritual things that I mentioned. Let's stop here. What we'd like to suggest you do, you got those cards ready to distribute? Paul's going to distribute some cards. And what we'd like to suggest you consider doing is filling out that card, giving us your name and phone number. Give us your email address if you want to communicate by email. But we'd like to have one of our ladies on our scheduling team give you a call and see if we could set up an appointment with one of our estate specialists. These are guys that are experienced and 15, 20 years of doing this, and just kind of take a look at your estate plan, where it is right now. And by the way, all the discussions that we're going to have with you are going to be completely confidential. Nobody here at the church, Paul, nor anybody else here is ever going to know what your stuff looks like. They're not going to know about your financial issues, any personal issues that you've got that come up in the estate planning process. All of that's confidential. That's the secret to our success, by the way. And we'd like to take you through a series of meetings via the telephone for the most part. Now, if you want to come out to Colorado Springs, we'd be happy for you to do that. If you have some complexities in your estate plan and we need to come in here to Dallas, we're in and out of Dallas all the time, and we could have those discussions, be happy to have those discussions. But we take you through a planning process over weeks or months, exchange proposals with you, and get you to a point where you've got a plan that's ready to go. And then with your permission, we're going to issue drafting instructions to the attorney that you select, either your attorney or the attorney out of our network. And by the way, about 80% of the people who go through this planning process select an attorney out of our network. That tells me one of two things. Either they didn't have an estate planning attorney and or they like the certainty of the cost of those documents. Either or both are valid reasons why. And Paul gave you a great illustration of that earlier when he talked about his own estate plan earlier. So fill that card out. We want to be of service to you. We want this to be a ministry. Paul's already touched on that, and we'd be happy to help you. Now, Paul and I are up here to answer any general questions that you might have. If you got something real personal and specific, you might want to wait till the rest of the group has left here today. But who might have a question?
Let me say something, if I can, about the cards first. So the cards, no obligation, and doesn't commit you to anything other than taking the first call, which will be from a scheduler, who will try to find a time when you're available at the same time that one of the planners is available to have your first call with the planner. No obligation. You have that first call and you don't like it, you can stop because it didn't cost you anything. The foundation is paying for that. Then, you'll have that first call and they'll talk about the kind of documents and information that you need to pull together. It's easy, it's not complicated, it's not hard to have the second call with the planner where they'll begin to actually develop the estate plan. And they'll then send you a draft of the estate plan, a draft of that pamphlet I was talking about, for you to look over, and then they'll have a call to answer any questions that you have, to tweak the plan, and ultimately, you may have 2 or 3 more calls, or that may be it. Ultimately, you'll end up with a final estate plan in a spiral notebook that you can then take to your attorney of choice. And up to that point, you've paid nothing. You could have stopped any time. The foundation is paid for all of that. And then once you go to the implementation process, that's when you have to pay a lawyer to actually draft the documents. But we have some really good, inexpensive ways to do that. So all you're obligating, I will tell you this, of everybody that's been through this, dozens of people, I think if I asked all of them, what would be your number one advice to anybody thinking about this? And I've asked many, and most of them would say, take that first call. Start the process, because you're never going to get there if you don't start the process. The process can be as short as a few months, or it can be as long as more than a year. Stan went through the process over a year ago, and he hadn't signed his documents yet. We finally made the final little tweaks recently, so my hope is he'll sign them soon. But it can take a while. It took me about 6 months. It could have been faster, but we all procrastinate a little bit, and I'd have calls scheduled, and then I'd have to reschedule them because I'd have a conflict. That kind of stuff happens, and so there's no pressure. Everything you talk to them about is confidential. They don't tell me anything. They don't tell the foundation anything. They don't tell the church anything. It's completely confidential, just as it would be if you were working with any estate planner or attorney. So first, any questions about that process? That's the main thing we wanted to impart today. We wanted to give you a little bit about estate planning to maybe encourage you to start the process. But we want you to understand the process because it's simple and it's easy and you need it. I promise you. I had a friend in Fort Worth that was a single woman, and she had cancer and was passing away. And she told me that she had a will, and her will left her entire estate to 2 friends. And but she had later learned that she had a niece that was about to start college, and she wanted to leave something for her, and she was planning to change her will. Well, she never got around to it. And she passed away, so her 2 friends got the entire estate. I kind of had the awkward situation as I actually had to go to her home and try to find that will. And the niece was a stepdaughter of mine, so I was really hoping I wouldn't find it, because in that case, the state of Texas would have said it goes all to the niece, because she only had 1 brother, and that was this little girl's daddy. And so it would have all gone to her. The brother was dead. So sometimes intestate succession, which is the estate plan that the state of Texas will impose upon you if you don't have a will, sometimes that works pretty well. Probate is not real complicated in Texas if your documents are done right, but if your documents are done right, you won't have to your estate will not go through probate. So you avoid any expense. And even though it's simple and not too expensive, it's still dollars that you'd rather not spend. You'd rather have those dollars go to your beneficiaries. So
all the examples that I gave you today had some kind of a personal family element in there that had a legal solution, but it had to have some thinking through process. Like, is this your daughter? Who's going to be the guardian of your daughter here if the 2 of you pass away? You may already have that settled, you may not. We're not looking for the answer here. But those kinds of issues, a special needs trust, yeah, that's a legal document, but who's going to be the executor of that? And just asking the kind of practical questions to get you through the whole process of figuring out what you're going to do. We're not going to try to manage your money. We're not going to try to sell you any financial products, so you don't have to worry about anything like that in the process as well. We do hundreds of plans a year. These guys have been doing this 15, 20 years. When we come up with a plan, when you come up with a plan that we've helped you put together, we're going to say, now, Brandon, it's time for you to hire your attorney. Here it looks like, here's what you're going to need. Do you want to use your attorney, or would you like to use an attorney out of our network? If you use our network attorney, here's what this set of documents are going to cost. With your permission, we'll issue the drafting instructions to the attorney. We'll get on the phone with your permission. We'll get a copy of the draft documents back. When you get those draft documents back, we'll review those with you on the phone with your attorney, and then we're going to step out of the process and allow the attorney-client privilege to take over. And then we're going to stay with you until you execute those documents. Because we don't have a gift, we don't have a final case to report here to the foundation until we've got a copy of those signed documents, and we've made copies of those and sent those back to you so that your surviving spouse or your surviving family member or other executor of your estate has all of your documents, everything in one place where you know where it is. And those of us who have been through settling an estate know how important it is to have all that information at hand and have it at a place where it can be processed in a convenient and thorough manner.
Documents, and the church will help you sign the documents if you don't use a local attorney who probably would want to be in charge of that process. So, but if you use like my guy from Arkansas, several people have used him. We'll help you sign the documents here. We'll provide the notary and the witnesses and all that kind of stuff. The reason why we're able to do this efficiently and cost effectively is the planning is not being done by attorneys. When I left the practice of law, I was charging $500 an hour. And that can add up pretty fast to be a pretty expensive process. We've taken the planning away from the attorney and put it with somebody who's makes a little less money than attorneys do, but knows estate planning probably as well as most general practice lawyers, probably more than them, and can develop a plan to recommend to the lawyer who will review it with you and make sure it's what you want and what you need, and then implement it. So the planning is, we've taken away from the lawyers who charge so much that we save you and us quite a bit of money. Our fee that we pay to Philanthrocorp is $3,000 for each plan, but we pay $1,500 of that when they complete the plan. They get the other $1,500 when you sign your documents. So that we're interested in you completing the process, and that incentivizes Philanthrocorp to follow up with you and make sure that you complete the process, because they don't get the second half of the payment until you do. But all the lawyers in the referral process are licensed in Texas. They don't have to be technically, but you're better off if you are, because they'll know like how many witnesses your will needs. Some states require 2, some require 3. Texas has what's called a self-proving affidavit that should be attached to all wills, which allows you to avoid much of the probate process, even if you go through probate. It makes it an easier process. A lawyer from Timbuktu might not know that. Yeah, so if you move to another state, you'd probably want to review your estate plan. You can do that through us and Philanthrocorp. They have lawyers in whatever state that you move to. You'd want to review that plan to make sure it still worked in that state, or did it need to be tweaked? Because it would, a lot of it might be controlled by the laws of that state where you die. It's extremely important to have a will. Even if you don't probate. My dad passed away about 2 years ago, and much of his estate we were able to pass on through what's called pay-on-death beneficiaries. His IRA, his annuities, his bank accounts, his brokerage accounts. He designated a pay-on-death beneficiary, 50% to me, 50% to my sister. And so we didn't need to probate his will for any of that, but he had a home. In many cases, you may have to probate the will just to pass the home to my sister and I.